Okay, so here I have a little cheap copy of Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. You've probably read it. It's one of those books you could have read in high school. One of the classics. One of the classic dystopian novels of the 20th century. And I'm actually reading it for the first time. I've been reading it for a while with my constant queue of books that I've been sort of flowing through over the last year. It's been about a year that I've been sort of tackling this new sort of a new method of reading that I've been doing, where I'm not reading a book all the way through and then moving to the next book. I've discovered that there's certain books I'll never get to if that's the method that I choose. If I read a book all the way through, the next book I'm going to read is going to be the book I really want to read, as opposed to the book maybe I need to read. And there's some books I was never getting to. I had all these books piled up on my shelf, and of course, I'd read nothing but comics. Not really. I didn't really read comics. But I would read books that were... I never got around to books like The Wealth of Nations and certain books in the Bible, or just longer books, mainly books over 1,000 pages. Who's gonna take the time to read that when they could read something shorter? So I've decided to do this kind of new method where I've got I'm up to 40 books now, and I just kind of cycle them through. I'll read 10, 20, 30 pages, sometimes 5 pages of a book, and put it down and pick something else up. And so one of the things I've discovered in this sort of method is that I don't get too stuck on one mode of thinking or one ideology. It's easy when you're reading a book to sort of think that everything is in relation to that book, and that the philosophy of that book and the ideology behind it, or the opinions of the author, it's easy to be influenced by that. And so I try not to do that. And so anyway, I'm just justifying why it's taken me so long to read this book. It's not really a very thick book at all. I could read this book in one day, but it's taken me a long time because I'll read 5 pages and pick up something else. So it's Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and in case you don't know, it's one of those future dystopian novels, sort of along the lines of 1984. Brave New World's in the top 5, and there's certain ones that not a lot of people know about. Anthony Burgess's The Wanting Seat is one of my favorites. But this Brave New World starts out with an introduction by Aldous Huxley, and the book was written in 1931 maybe, or 1932. And then he wrote the foreword for this edition in 1946. Okay, and so I've got some notes that I wrote from the introduction. First, he kind of opens with a sort of expression of remorse over certain choices he made, in the direction he took for the book. I don't know why authors do this so often. They go back to something that was really good that everybody loves, and then they pick it apart, or tell why they don't like it. It's okay, well, we wouldn't even know your name if it wasn't for this book. So apparently you did something right. And even if you think you did it wrong, chances are you're wrong in thinking that, and you probably just did it right, and you should leave it alone. So I guess he'd considered rewriting the book at one time because well, let's face it, it's kind of a ruthless book. It paints a grim picture of the future. And he's yeah, well, things could have been okay. Maybe I should have, instead of having a choice between the primitive world, that John came from, and then the brave new world that Bernard came from, instead of having to make this choice that this guy would have to live in one or the other. You know, when Bernard brought John to the newer civilization, so that he could be with, you know, his people and his kind or whatever. That there's this, you know, he's basically saying there's kind of this false dichotomy there between insanity and lunacy, where he could have found sort of a middle ground with this sort of, he talks about the, you know, another option being this sort of decentralized system where people live in this sort of these cooperative societies, and it's a little bit more like libertarianism, the cultivation of the sovereign individual through decentralized systems, stuff like Bitcoin and stuff like that. And so he talks about there being, like, he should have made a third option, but, you know, I'm reading this sort of apology this guy's making for a perfect book that he wrote. Well, maybe not perfect, but it's pretty darn good enough to be a classic. Okay, so you're gonna take a classic that you made and lament that you didn't throw in this third option. And to me, honestly, I thought it would have killed it. I think what he's trying to do is, like, he realized the book that he wrote is pretty ruthless, and then he's trying to be nice. You know, he wants people to think he's optimistic or something, instead of the pessimism, which is the book. Because, well, let's face it, the future, it's easy to be pessimistic about the future. Even if you're not completely pessimistic, it's kind of fun to be anyway. So he starts out with this sort of apology, you know, and in my opinion, if he rewrote the book, it would probably suck. And then he goes on to sort of slam his academic critics a bit. I don't really know what their criticisms were of him, that he was, like, you know, just a sad example of a failure or something like that, and so he kind of retorted with the idea of, like, well, I guess they're the funny example of a success story. In the interest of his goal to have a plausible future in which his vision could be conceivable, he notes the absence of nuclear fission, but goes on to justify this as beside the point of the story. The point of the story is more about how biology and psychology affect the individual characters in the story and how it affects humanity. He's saying that, like, the physical sciences don't really affect humanity, at least in regards to the context of this story. I mean, yeah, physical science can be used to develop nuclear weapons which would annihilate us as a species, but as far as, like, the particulars of this future dystopia, the character of it is brought about by advances in biology and psychology, and so these are the things that influence the sort of zeitgeist that this guy's living in, you know, things that make it different from today. Okay, so he talks about this sort of revolution that needs to take place in order for this future. Well, he calls it a utopia, but I think most of us know it's more of a dystopia. But this revolution that needs to take place in order to bring that about. And he cites different kinds of revolution, how there's political revolutions, there's social revolutions, there's religious revolutions, technological revolutions, economic revolutions, and how the Marquis de Sade is sort of a prototype for a revolutionary figure who was a complete nihilist, who wanted to just degrade the human. And so this idea in Brave New World that, you know, everybody sexually belongs to everybody else, and, you know, if you want to have somebody, you just kind of take your pick, and it happens. There's no, it's socially encouraged for people to sleep with as many people as possible. And so this sort of comes from a sadist point of view, or sadist, however you want to say it. It seems like if it's the Marquis de Sade, shouldn't it be sadist? So sort of a sadist mentality would lend itself to this inevitability that everybody's going to be completely sexually promiscuous, and having sex is just like shaking hands. It's no big deal. It's nothing personal. It's just, that's how we get to know each other. And it's encouraged that we all get to know each other in this way. I mean, these guys must have a lot of STDs going around. That's what I would think. But this sort of nihilistic, anarchistic, chaotic philosophy of the Marquis de Sade sort of stands for the undoing of traditional civilization, which is based on moral decency, and just doing away with all of that. And of course we see a lot of that in today's society, how environmental concerns are sort of the backbone of a lot of this revolution that's going on. Just to do the most socially and morally abhorrent thing in the name of saving the environment. And people do it all the time. I mean, this whole movement, as it's taught to children in school, is obviously directed at, it's there to misdirect them from marriage and family and the proliferation of the human species and the multiplication of humans. And so there's a lot of people that want to do away with that. And so one of the best ways to do that is kind of get them while they're young and dissuade them from that to begin with, and give them drugs that will prevent them from developing sexually, developing normal sex apparatus. So I'll get to that a little bit later in here, because he does talk about that. So the aim of those who govern Brave New World is not anarchist, but it's actually stability that they want. So the idea of just keeping everybody docile through the use of drugs and keep them pacified through keep them busy with their sexual activity, because it's pleasurable, so it takes up their time, and it's their leisure time is expanded. And so that's part of this society, is a lot of their time is freed up. It doesn't seem like, it's like people still have jobs, which is another thing that we're not really seeing happen in this book, where now we're facing this inevitability that most people's jobs are going to be taken through AI and through robotics and automated systems that do all the driving. I mean, driving is one of the biggest industries in this country, and so driving and production and all this stuff that can be automated without humans. But in the book, most of those menial jobs are taken by people who were selected to be of a lower caste, because all this was mathematically figured out when they decided how many alphas and how many betas and omegas they were going to have. So they purposefully create morons to do lower tasks that these people don't ask questions. They just do their job and they go home, back to their pod. They're low maintenance people that don't need to be managed so much. So that's sort of the idea of this, is that society is managed. Aldous Huxley talks about here in our world, the 20th century, being rife with nationalistic totalitarianism from the right and left, and fascism and Bolshevism. With the advent of atomic energy, Huxley sees the future as essentially totalitarian. So we have a totalitarian past, recent past in the 20th century, so we can expect a totalitarian future, but maybe not so militaristic. It can be brought about, this totalitarianism can be brought about not necessarily through the force of, say, something like fascism, but more with propaganda and drugs and social conditioning through media. But I personally think that, the fascist element's still going to be there. They're going to get you from every angle. I mean, not everybody watches TV. They can't make you watch TV. But here's what I'm thinking as part of the possible future here on Earth in our time, is that I think that with a lot of these jobs disappearing, eventually you're going to be able to make money by watching commercials or by watching media, by viewing media. They're going to pay you to view propaganda and to view advertisements, because I do believe that it will still be a consumer civilization. It'll still be a consumer society. And so they want you to buy certain things from certain people, and they're going to have you watching advertisements, and so you're going to get paid to click on ads. So unless we can somehow manage to create a decentralized society based on humanism and cooperative structures, sort of the libertarian ideal, Huxley sees the probability that all the world's governments will be more or less completely totalitarian, even before the harnessing of atomic energy, as well as during or after that harnessing. Only a large-scale popular movement toward decentralization and self-help can arrest the present tendency towards statism. He says that at the time of his writing this particular foreword in 1946, that there's no sign that such a movement will take place. Of course, now we do see these movements cropping up from internet culture, your red pill community, crypto guys, pickup artists, martial artists, homesteaders, gun owners, hunters, preppers, etc. He goes on to make the point that future totalitarianisms need not be overt and militaristic like the days of old, that these systems were inefficient economically. Not that anybody cares about how humane they are or were. The most efficient totalitarian managerial state controls a population of slaves who do not need to be coerced because they love their servitude. We make them love it through social conditioning, propaganda, media, and education. He said that the confusion, the social confusion, would result in more centralized power and government control increase. And the best way to win at propaganda is not in what you actively teach, but in what you leave out. You censor out the ideas you don't want to proliferate. From a practical point of view, truth is great, but silence about truth is even greater. Not mentioning certain subjects. Shielding the people from undesirable facts and arguments. In this way, they can influence opinion more effectively than with the most compelling logical arguments. Then to make the positive propaganda more effective. After all, we are trying to prevent persecution and violence here. The government-sponsored UBI. Without economic security, the love of servitude will never proliferate. But this security will be quickly taken for granted. What we need is a personal revolution of mind and body. And that's where the sadism comes in. The whole degradation of human morality. The giving away of oneself to everybody else. The relinquishment of our own personal sexuality and our own privacy, our own bodies, which now become the property of everybody else. Not only do we not have personal property, even our own physical embodiment is not our own. So they get the children when they're young. In the book, there's the part where they go out back and they see this kind of school schoolyard banter going on with these children, and they're what they do is they get the children out onto a playground and they encourage them to touch each other and experiment sexually, play sexual games at a young age. And so they get them when they're young. And I mean, that's what's happening right now with this, whole drag time story hour and all this crap that's going on. They're getting them while they're young. They're inculcating their values into these children, dissuading them from wanting to procreate and have healthy, normal family lives. They don't want them to be a burden on the environment, on the ecology of Mother Earth, screaming, crying babies, indoctrinating children when they're young. The integration of the right kinds of drugs to find a safe drug that doesn't inebriate you too much, but it just kind of puts you in a lower state to where you're not thinking on a high plane. You're on a low vibration. You're just kind of daydreaming, not really being too creative, too imaginative, sort of putting a filter on your imagination so that you're subdued. You're not being subversive. Implementing identity politics and hierarchical determination through a social credit score. The removal of dissidents. A foolproof system of eugenics through abortion and sterilization and genetic manipulation to standardize the human product and facilitate the task of managers. He thought that the drugs and the scientific caste system were but a few generations away from 1946. Where does this leave us now? So if from 1946 it was a few generations, that means like in one generation. Or maybe, why not now? Now is as good a time as any. Marriage licenses will be sold like dog licenses, expiring in a year, but with the possibility of holding multiples and no restrictions against changing them out, or maybe just doing away with marriage altogether. As political and economic freedom diminishes, sexual freedom tends to increase, and the dictator encourages that freedom, unless he needs soldiers or families to colonize maybe Mars or a conquered land. Daydreaming on drugs, binge watching shows and porn in our little coon pods. In this way, we are easily acclimated to a state of servitude. He says it looks like the utopia will be here sooner than expected. He thought at first it would be 600 years in the future. Now he said it's all possible within a century. Only if, of course, we don't self-annihilate through nuclear war. The solution, he says, is decentralization. The applied sciences, not as the master, with humans as the slaves, but as a means of creating a society of sovereign individuals. And unless we choose this route for ourselves and make this happen, we have only two other choices. Either A, a number of national militarized totalitarian states with the accompanying terror of nuclear weapons and the destruction of civilization, or at least endless wars. Or B, a one-world totalitarian government called into existence by social chaos resulting from rapid technological advances developing into a welfare tyranny of utopia. So that's it for his forward for Brave New World.